Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Now today's video is a very interesting one, that's for sure. Definitely one of the more interesting cases I've ever come across, and it's probably due to just the mystery behind the story and how unsolvable it really seems. So before we get into today's video, I just want to say a quick reminder to please consider subscribing if you guys enjoy the type of content that we do post. We like to talk about stuff like true crime, paranormal stories, anything mysterious, anything unexplained. We like to post 2 to 3 times a week. So if that interests you, again, I ask that you guys please consider subscribing and hit the like button if that's something you guys wouldn't mind doing. Okay, so let's get into today's story. Now, before we get into today's video, I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that this video does talk about mental illness and ending one's life. So if that is something that triggers you, that is hurtful to you, then I would please recommend clicking out of this video and joining me on a next one. So the story takes place, or it starts on February 14th, 1975, when a couple was actually driving through a small town in Louisiana called Naoimi. And they were actually going through a really small, secluded area called Plaquemines Parish. So as the couple is walking through the area, it's getting darker and they can't really see too far into the distance. So they're walking around and then they see something glistening in the trees not too far away from they are. All they can really tell is that there's something white in the distance. So they start walking closer and closer, but they had no idea what they were about to find would be something that would really just traumatize anyone. What they came across was the body of a teenage boy. Unfortunately, he had decided to end his life by hanging himself from a tree, from a persimmon tree, with a long white bedsheet. He was estimated to be around 16, 17 years old. He was fairly tall. He was about 6 feet tall. He had brown hair, brown eyes, light complexion. He was Caucasian. He was wearing a yellow and maroon shirt and blue pants as well. One particular thing about his body is that he was found without any shoes on, but he did have mismatching socks. And next to the big tree where he was found was actually a small jar. And in this mason jar were several letters, and a few of them were dedicated to different people, including his parents. And it's in these notes that people were able to pull certain clues and kind of try to piece together somewhat of a story. But even with all of his notes and the last words that he was able to write, the story still doesn't add up. It still doesn't give us a full explanation of who this young man was. Now I'm going to read you parts of the note. I'm going to read a majority of it. So if I'm looking down, it's because it is a fairly long note, so it is kind of hard to memorize. But I'll read it and then I'll pause and explain if I need to in between so you guys can get a better understanding and maybe some more context. So the note starts and it's addressed to both mom and dad. It goes on to say, "I have wanted to do this for over a year. I am not sad or see this as tragic. I feel a release. This is the only way I knew how to attain harmony. When you stop growing, you are dead. I stopped growing a long time ago. I never did develop into a real person, and I cannot tolerate the false and empty existence I have ever created." Now, this next part here was specifically addressed to police officers. He actually left specific instructions as to what they should do when they did discover him. "You are bound to preserve domestic peace and order. If you pursue who I was and spend hundreds of dollars, you will accomplish little. There are no legal consequences of my death or any kind of entanglements. All that can happen is that you will shatter the domestic peace and order of 2 innocent lives. Do not deprive them of the hope that their missing son will return. Let it be as I wasn't ever here. Simply cremate me as John Doe." So this paragraph does play an important role into some of the clues that we'll go on to later and some of the theories that I was able to come across. But the note doesn't end there. There's still a few more important parts that we need to go through. "It is best if I cease to live quietly than risk that later I will break and shatter by violence or linger under years of care. I implore you to see a psychiatrist in order that you might understand my death and my life. Ask thoroughly about what I was, and you will see it was not tragic that I am gone, but more natural than if I continued. Now, this next part of the note goes into a little bit more of an explanation as to why he could have done something like this. It doesn't give us a concrete answer, but it does let us see a little bit more of an insider perspective as to what may have been going on in this guy's head. I was born with a definite pervasive melancholy. What frustrated me most in the last year was that I had built no ties to family or friends. There was nothing of lasting worth and value. I led a detached existence and I was a parody of a person, literally and figuratively. I didn't tell jokes, I was a joke. Now, the note goes on to reference a very famous philosopher called Emile Durkheim. And this reference, along with the general way the note was written, led police officers to think that this man was fairly educated and most likely belonged to an upper class or middle upper class family. Just because of the way he was talking and the way he was writing, his thoughts were of that someone who was quite intelligent. Now, the part that he references to regarding the philosopher is his thoughts on what it means to end your life. And he wrote, ending one's life is an inner direction of homicidal feelings against someone else. So definitely some pretty dark stuff. It shows us a little bit more about what he could have been thinking in his last moments, his last few days living, his last few weeks. He was definitely not in a good place. I know it's definitely hard to deal with depressive thoughts or very, very difficult and sad thoughts, especially when you feel like you're completely alone. So I do feel bad for what this guy was going through, even though we don't know exactly what that was. Just reading the note, though, really does give you a sense of feeling that he was probably alone, or he was feeling very alone, like he couldn't really talk to anyone. Most people have lots of friends around them. If not, then they have family. They have colleagues that they can talk to. And, most people don't really realize how lucky they are to have lots of people around them that they can easily relate to without really second guessing it, while there are lots of people out there that really just have no one. And if they try to help themselves, some people will often get a pet. Pets are amazing companions, but unfortunately they just don't talk back to you. So it can be pretty dark if you have no one around you to support you, to talk to you, or even console you. So the note goes on to conclude by saying, I am no longer interested in the world and know that it is not interested in me. When you stop growing, you are dead. I stopped growing a long time ago. Now, there was a separate piece of paper in the mason jar that was also addressed to his parents, and this is what this said. You have provided me with excellent advantages and privileges and experiences. I am extremely grateful for all your sacrifices, time, and support. I am now repaying you with an arrogant act. In this light, I do see it as criminal. I can only hope that you see that it was me who caused it. Now, from this note, we know that this man did not want to be identified. He basically wanted to go out on his own. He wanted to finally be at peace and really not disturb anyone in his life that would have experienced grief and sadness from his passing. Ignoring the scene and ignoring the note wasn't really an option for them. So they did do an investigation into the entire situation. The investigation ended up lasting approximately 4 months, where approximately over 300 families who had missing sons came forward to see if this man could have potentially been their son. And it wasn't just in the city or the state. This was a countrywide thing. Now, in an attempt to identify him, they did look through his IDs. They did look to see if he had anything on him that would identify him, but they weren't able to find anything on this guy. He had clearly pre-planned this in a way where he did not want to be identified. He even basically told us in his letter, I don't want you to know who I am, just let me be. And the police still tried to figure out who he was. They took his fingerprints in, but unfortunately he didn't show up in the database across the US. So what that tells us is that he wasn't a criminal and he hadn't been in the army at any point in his life. Like I mentioned earlier, the only thing that they really did know was details about his physical appearance and the fact that he was very likely an educated individual just based on his writings and his knowledge. But other than that, the case went cold very, very fast. Now, that didn't stop the internet or even people at the time from coming up with many, many different theories as to why this guy could have done this and who this was. Okay, so let's dive into the theories. There were quite a few theories out there, but the main four that I came across are the ones that we're going to discuss. And I still don't know which one I side with the most, really. I do feel like this person was suffering from a lot of negative feelings, a lot of heaviness in his heart. What people are trying to find out is the root of that, what was causing him to feel this way. So the most obvious theory is one that he could have been suffering from a mental illness. So this seems to be very likely. There's a lot of speculation as to how severe of an illness he could have been going through. And especially when you take into consideration the part where he mentions being under care for a long period of time, this makes people wonder whether he was in care or that he had a fear of actually being in care, like he would have to go into some sort of institution. But that definitely is one of the more popular theories. Theory number 2 revolves around the idea that he possibly could have been a closeted gay man who still hadn't necessarily come to terms with who he was, what he was feeling inside, or if he had a really hard time expressing or letting that out, because this case was in 1975. So at that time, being gay was still considered somewhat of a taboo subject. There was definitely a lot of people that believed it was a mental illness at the time, which it's not. It definitely is not. And it makes me so sad that people feel like they can't just be themselves without all this stigma surrounding them. But there's a lot of speculation about this theory that he was definitely struggling with his identity and didn't know how to handle that in the outside world. And a part of that reasoning comes from the letter where he says, "Ask thoroughly about what I was, and you will see that it is not tragic that I am gone, but more natural than if I continued." I feel like there's a lot of reasons someone could be depressed or that someone could want to end their life. Aside from that one part in the letter, there doesn't seem to be any other details alluding that this could have been the case for him. Okay, so theory number 3 is that he actually was suffering from a mental illness and he had already broken out of a mental institution or some sort of hospital. Now, the main reason people believe this is because he was found with a white bedsheet and his shoes were missing. Some people try to play off the shoes as missing as him trying to get rid of further evidence that could potentially identify him. And then other people are saying that he probably just ran out of the institution or the hospital and just grabbed what he could and made his escape. The part of the letter that references this or that makes people think that this could have been the case is when he says, "Then risk that later I will break and shatter by violence or linger under years of care." This seems to allude that he basically didn't want to lose his mind, kept locked up for a long period of time. From what I understand, this alludes to him not wanting to be locked up in an institution, especially if it meant being in there for a long period of time. I'm sure it's a very, very difficult thing to be placed under supervision and under care 24/7, especially if you're suffering from one of these illnesses. So that does make a little bit more sense to me. That's what I kind of feed into a little bit more. But the next theory seems to be a very, very popular one. So theory number 4 is the idea that this unknown man is actually a man who went missing in 1975 by the name of Bayard Cousins. So it was reported that Bayard left his home on February 1st, 1975, 2 weeks before the unknown man was found. Now, he was living in Virginia Beach at the time, and when he decided to leave, he was living with his parents, so he waited until his parents were out of town to make his escape. Now, before he left, he did leave a note for his parents, and when his parents returned, they found the note and discovered that it said, I've gone away. Please don't worry about me. Don't come looking for me. Now, where things start to add up a little bit is his physical appearance. He was the same height. He was 6 feet tall. He was Caucasian. He had brown hair, hazelish brown eyes. He was an ecology activist and was also fluent in Spanish, even though it wasn't his first language. So this alludes to the fact, or to the idea, that he was a fairly intelligent person. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So Bayard, at the time that he went missing, was actually 22 years old. So a lot of people automatically think this disqualifies him as being John Doe, or the unknown man. But a lot of people who knew Bayard say that he was often confused or often mistaken to be a lot younger than he was. I guess he had like baby features, or he just had a baby face. A lot of people would often think he was in his teens, or at least like around 18 or so, when he was actually 22. And so John Doe, the man that was found, was never properly identified. The only thing police were able to do was approximately guess his age. Don't really have a solid way of saying 100% that this boy, or this man, was indeed 16, 17 years old. So without that proper identification, there is wiggle room to say that he could have potentially been in his early 20s as well. Now, this theory actually also explains why the boy's parents never reported him missing. He did leave a note letting his parents know that he was leaving and not to come looking for him. And if he was actually 22, this means he obviously was an adult. He obviously was an adult and able to make his own decisions. So this could explain as to why his parents didn't go looking for him. So it could explain as to why no one ever really came looking for him and no one ever claimed him. Now, I know with today's technology, this case could probably be solved fairly easily if the body were to be exhumed. But unfortunately, this is where it gets really, really annoying. So in 2005, there was Hurricane Katrina, and that did destroy a large part of Louisiana. I remember when Hurricane Katrina happened, it was a very, very devastating event. So many people lost their lives. It was very tragic. During Hurricane Katrina, all of his case files were actually lost and destroyed in the hurricane and in the floods. And in those files was actually the location of where his body was buried. So even that, people now don't really know where he was. Some people seem to speculate that he was indeed buried somewhere in Louisiana. Other people think that he was likely cremated. But I mean, we'll never actually know the answer to this because all of his files were lost. So what do you guys think about this case? I thought it was fairly interesting. I thought it was definitely one of the more intriguing cases I've read in a while, even though we don't actually know the full story. I think that's what interested me the most. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Which theory do you guys think is more plausible? Do you think this guy was suffering from a mental illness? Do you think he just chose to run away? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And if you guys enjoy this type of content, if you enjoyed today's video, please subscribe or hit the like button. That does it for me today. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.